Mhm.
Hello again. Stroke Warrior Radio is back with one of our special shows about caregivers. If you're a caregiver listening today, whether you're caring for a stroke survivor, a brain injury survivor, or a loved one navigating chronic illness, this episode is for you. Today we're talking about caregiver burnout, not as a failure, not as a weakness, but as a very human response to carrying too much for too long. I'm honored to be joined by Anna Teal. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
From Rooted Caregiver, an organization dedicated to supporting caregivers emotionally, spiritually, and practically. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I
Mhm.
appreciate the work you do. As I was telling you before, and caregivers are the unsung heroes, so I really want to do more for them. Let's
Yeah.
start by grounding the conversation a little bit. Many caregivers don't even identify as caregivers. They just see themselves as doing what needs to be done for someone they love. Can you share a little bit about Rooted Caregiver and what inspired this work for you?
Thank you, Ralph. I'm honored to be here with you today to talk about this topic. Rooted Caregiver was born out of a lived experience. I myself started out as a caregiver. My husband had a stroke, and overnight, just our life has changed. So, um, what I quickly realized is that caregivers are often invisible. Everyone asks how the survivor's doing, but very few people are asking how the caregiver's holding up. And Rooted Caregiver exists to remind caregivers that they matter too. We support caregivers emotionally, spiritually, practically, because caregivers isn't just a role, it's kind of like an identity shift. When caregivers hear the phrase caregiver burnout, like I wish they understood right away that burnout is not a personal failure. It's not a weakness. It's not a lack of gratitude or love. Burnout is what happens when humans, carry more responsibility, stress, and emotional weight. And when they do it for too long. And a lot of caregivers do that for too long and experience this type of burnout. So that Rooted Caregiver was designed to help them relieve that stress, find community, and to just have a space where they can breathe and be okay. They don't have to pretend to be okay. They can just be who they are and let down those walls.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. A caregiver burnout really doesn't happen overnight. Although I did see it when my daughter came out to the hospital. She would leave the room and come back and I know she was crying, those kind of things. But it builds kind of slowly. Doesn't, you have to factor in the exhaustion that sleep doesn't really fix, irritability, and that feels unfamiliar, emotional numbness. I mean, there's so many things. Guilt for resting. Um, what what are some of the most common signs you see that tell you a caregiver is burning out?
Oh, like we see caregivers who are exhausted, like even after sleeping. So people who just they tell us they're numb or disconnected from joy, or even they're super irritable, but that might not be in their character. So that irritability can play out like that. A short fuse followed by deep guilt, sometimes and forgetfulness, because when you're the one doing everything, oh my goodness. I mean, you could have a million sticky notes and still not keep up with everything some days, between appointments and paying bills and all these things. And the most common one we see, unfortunately, is just signs of depression and anxiety, and just grief. And that can be part of that depression, that it's kind of all interwoven emotionally, unfortunately. But yeah, and what we talk about, ambiguous grief or anticipatory grief, you're grieving someone who's still here. That has been a huge topic of a lot of conversations I've had with caregivers, and giving that a name, because some people, they didn't know that there was a name for that. They just knew that grief was, kind of more of a linear cycle. anticipatory grief is more of a circle. So you kind of you never get out of those loops. You just have to find ways of coping with it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I'm curious. I should have asked your caregiving experience. I want to interject too. I know a woman that unfortunately her and her husband have passed away, but she always said, um, I bet you find this interesting. She said, "Stop calling me a caregiver. I'm his wife."
Yes, yes. And good
Um,
for her for saying that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You know, and we talked about it before. Stroke is a family affair. You know, so I mean, when did that family affair happen for you and how?
So in 2018 is when Ryan had his stroke. My husband had a stroke. And, one in three people who have a stroke can have aphasia, which can affect your speaking, your, comprehension, your reading skills. It can affect a lot of different things depending on where the damage is in the brain. And so, that year, we're coming up on, his anniversary. It was February 6th. So in 2018. So yeah, that day I will never forget because yeah, our whole lives changed in an instant. There's so many things you take for granted, saying I love you, hearing I love you. Um, and yeah, that's the day when I became officially a caregiver. And it's been a long, hard road because Ryan, he was not able to return to work, unfortunately, and I hated that for him because his work was his life, and it's just it's hard because you do assume all these different roles as a caregiver. You're trying to be a motivator, you're the person, you're the bill payer, you're the vacation organizer, if you even get to go on a vacation, you're doing everything, and it's a lot. It's a lot, and a lot of people who have not been a caregiver to a spouse or a loved one, I'm sorry, they don't understand the load that you bear emotionally, physically, like everything. It's so much.
I'm curious, always curious on how people get through the beginning. I mean, the emotions that you had in the hospital, if you went to ICU, if you did inpatient, how did you get through that? How do other caregivers need to get through that?
Well, to be honest with you, Ralph, I don't know. Like, I barely got through it. I wouldn't say I got through it with flying colors. I cried every single day, but I went to the hospital every single day. Ryan's parents were very, supportive during that time. We would take shifts so I could go home and get a shower. But I think the worst part of it is not knowing like what your life's going to look like. It's just the unknown, and that's in the quiet moments. That's what kind of eats you up. You're like, what is our life going to be after this? We were thinking about having kids, and that totally disrupted that. I mean, it was just it totally changed everything. But I during those moments, I will say, and I will be totally honest, and I I did turn to some alcohol like during that time because I like I got very depressed, and I got very my faith got me through because at a certain point it was like, Anna, like you can't keep drinking like this. This is not helping. You need to like figure this out and straighten up. And but I know a lot of people, a lot of caregivers, unfortunately, that I've talked to that they've managed their stress and their weight with alcohol or other things. And I don't judge that. Like
Yeah,
I've done it. I've been there. I know what that's like.
yeah, the coping skills, they don't tell us enough. I mean,
No, they don't.
nobody told us this is going to be the most difficult thing that you've ever done in your life, you know. Um, so I think that's something that the medical profession and therapists need to get a better handle on is preparing us a little better. How long did it take before I, my personal feeling is my recovery became better after I met other survivors.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the same thing happened for you?
Absolutely. There's something to be said for those Me Too moments when you find someone who is going through a similar thing. For me, it was my friend Julie. When I took Ryan up to the University of Michigan for an intensive speech clinic for a month, we lived there for a month and he did intensive speech therapy, which was so valuable to him. I met Julie and Jim. At the time, they lived in Virginia, but Julie was, and she still is my very good friend, but it was so comforting knowing someone who was a female and a spousal caregiver and who still worked. Because a lot of people that I had met prior to her was they were retired or they didn't have the weight of like providing still for your family and keeping things afloat. And it's just kind of a little bit different stressors. So for me, when I found Julie, I was just like, oh my God, you understand, you get it. Like, and it was just like an instant connection because she was working, she was trying to juggle all these things, and we would talk and we would have like wine nights, we would zoom with each other and just like lay it all out, and there's no judgment, and we could just talk and just be ourselves, and we understood each other because we were in the same spot, and there's just that there's no judgment, and she knows
Yeah.
exactly what I'm going through.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference meeting other survivors and care partners. Let's
Yeah.
go back to the burnout, caregiver burnout. What do you think? Why do you think caregivers so often blame themselves instead of recognizing the burnout for what it is?
I think there's a lot of guilt, there's a pressure to push through. And, you tell yourself, well, I love this person. There's been other people that have done it before, and maybe they seem like they could do it fine. Like, why am I having trouble? There's a lot of internal judgment. And it's a lot of like self-sacrifice. And at least I know that was for me. I felt like I needed to self-sacrifice to make everything okay because Ryan had this horrible thing happen to him. And I was trying to do everything in my power to make it right. And at the end of the day, yes, I've done a lot for him, but you know, you can't put all that pressure on you. It's almost you're adding more to your mental, capacity, and it's not fair to you, to do that. You're adding to your burnout by setting expectations that are just not realistic for yourself. Um, but
And
that
yeah, that guilt is, I'm trying to understand the guilt because, what, for example, what do you feel guilty about? Is it, the need to be strong and he can't be, or how do you explain that guilt?
I think guilt is everywhere for a caregiver. So it's like you feel guilty for resting, you feel guilty for needing help or asking for help. You feel guilty for wanting time alone. You feel guilty for being frustrated. Even like you feel guilty thinking about what your life would have looked like if this hadn't happened to you.
Oh, wow.
There's just a lot, and there's a lot of pressure to be strong, and then if you have a weak moment, it feels like you're letting yourself down and you feel guilty for that. So at least when I was kind of going through the system with Ryan, a lot of the doctors were like, hey, you've got to be strong, you can't cry in front of him. There was a lot of pressure I felt like I got from doctors specifically and nurses that I didn't necessarily agree with. And I'm like, you have to allow a caregiver, time. I mean, you can't just dictate that they can't cry in front of their loved one. Like, that's just not realistic. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, you can't internalize, you can only internalize so long.
no, no. So like it's a lot. It's because you feel so, especially when you really love the person who had a stroke or who is having a hard time, who is not able to going to be able to live their life the way they knew it. Oh my God, it just kills you. And it's just like, what if that happened to me? I would, it's just there's just a lot. It's just so complicated, your emotions around guilt.
Yeah. What would you say to a caregiver listening right now who feels selfish for even hearing this conversation?
Well, I would say don't feel selfish. I mean, just by you have to understand that you're human. I think sometimes caregivers think they're superhumans or superwomen, supermen. And I think allowing yourself the capacity to know that you're human, you have human needs. You're not expected to just give, give, and give without any return, because that's not healthy. There has to be other ways to create more of a balance in your life. And I know, like early on in the days of caregiving for me, there was no room to create any kind of balance. I was merely surviving at that point. So I have to be careful what I say there because, like, you do go through this survival period, and I would get so aggravated when people were like, you need to take care of yourself. And I would be like, when? When should I like take time to take care of myself? I mean, are you going to come and help? Like,
Yeah.
or what? How do I do that? Like, I literally every square second was booked, or there was therapy, or we were doing something. And I had no time in the beginning. And I was so burned out, but then, like, as your loved one gets better, you do have a little bit more time and space as they become more independent. Hopefully they do. Every situation is different, but you have to just be realistic with yourself and start carving out that time to take care of yourself and really figure out who you are, because I can't tell you how many caregivers I've talked to that they lose their sense of self. You were talking about your friend saying that, I'm a wife, but some spousal caregivers, they don't feel like a wife, or they haven't felt like a wife in a long time because they're just surviving and they're doing everything they can, and the relationship falls to the very bottom, like date nights and all those things, that were normal before the stroke. When do you have time to do that? Like, so that's low on the list compared to everything you need to do to keep things going in your life at this point. But I would say,
I
like,
would,
don't be so hard on yourself. You're human.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I, as I told you, I've been by myself. I lived alone when I had my stroke and after my stroke, except for about 6 months. I'm curious about the communication with the survivor and the care partner. What are some of the difficulties of that? I know he had the aphasia, which wipes out all communication until he gets better with that. How important a role does that play in the time for yourself and his time for himself?
It's critical. You have to understand, there was a long period of time, years, where Ryan and we didn't have a second to ourselves. We were always together because I was his support tool in a way, like with his communication. But there did come a point where I was like, I just want to go on vacation by myself.
Sure.
And that shocked him, and he was very, very upset. But you have to communicate those things, because sometimes, and like I say, every situation is different, but sometimes the person who has had a stroke or aphasia, they may not be understanding how hard of a toll it's taking on you unless you really tell them. They may be able to see the signs, like what you say. You could see that, your daughter may have been crying, but you don't know the extent of the toll it's taking unless you communicate. And in whatever way you can. Like, if your loved one has aphasia, I mean, you have to be able to either text or write or try to your best to communicate those things. But it's important to be okay talking about that. And I know a lot of couples are like, oh, he's been through so much, I don't want to upset him, I don't want to do anything. But it comes to a point where it's like, if you don't take care of yourself and do these things for yourself, then you're shaving years off of your life. I remember going to a doctor's appointment, and my doctor was like, Anna, if you don't do something, like you're not gonna last long. Like your health is deteriorating. I had like severe gut issues. I had like all kinds of just
Oh,
it
wow.
was stress induced. And so I had to take a step back and I was like, you know what? Like I can't do this anymore. And sometimes it's okay to say that. Like I need some time to myself to take a step back, you know. But communicating that is so important, and just being honest and creating space for that kind of conversation is just it's beneficial for the both of you long term. Like it may be hard short term, but it's going to benefit you long term, if that makes sense.
Great point. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Mhm.
I always want to give listeners something they can use today. If a
Mhm.
caregiver is listening right now and thinking, I'm overwhelmed and don't know where to start, what is one small, realistic step they can take from today's conversation?
I would say that, you know, try to, especially with your emotions, be in tune with your emotions because, like you were saying, burnout can really, it's kind of a quiet destroyer. um, take time for yourself, even if it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes by yourself, or meditating, praying, doing like a creative art outlet, something that makes you happy. For me, it's playing my guitar, you know, even if it's for a short period of time, just do that, you know, and set time if you can. Like I said early on, sometimes it's impossible to do that, but if you can make space for that, do it and don't feel bad about it, because you've got to take care of yourself, because if you're not around, then you know who's going to take care of your loved one. So it's
Right.
just you know, just try to find those things that you love doing that make you feel most like yourself.
How can caregivers begin setting boundaries, especially when they feel that they don't have a choice?
That's so tough. Um,
And how
you
long
can
does it
start.
take? I mean, obviously, you've been through this whole recovery, and then you started rooted caregivers, right?
Yeah,
Um,
Rudy.
wha- how do you set those boundaries and build that tolerance, if you will?
Well, sometimes it's like what they say, it's the act of saying no to things. If you know that, you know, maybe you feel guilt or badly, maybe your loved one has a speech appointment, but you're getting sick or you're not feeling good, just you have to say no. You have to make those calls, and you have to be okay with that. And you know, sometimes I think just praying and meditating can help you manage that guilt and those emotions a little bit better than just kind of letting it ride. But I mean, I know that's easier said than done, because I know those feelings can be really intense sometimes, and setting boundaries can only intensify those feelings that you have, like anxiety and stress. But you know, I think it's being in tune to what boundaries that you need to immediately set. Maybe that's with family, maybe that's with your schedule. I mean, boundaries can exhibit in multiple different ways, but you just have to sometimes take a step back and say, what do I need to change about my life that would make me feel more whole and complete and help me breathe a little better, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. There's, I still have difficulty for myself setting boundaries until I learned a while ago, no is a complete sentence, you know.
Yes.
I love
Yeah.
that phrase. I've got it on post-it notes on my mirrors.
Yes. It's very impactful.
Staying rooted. Your organization is called Rooted Caregiver, and I love that name. What does staying rooted really mean when life feels unstable and unpredictable?
Rooted is comes from a point of just having something steady to hold on to when everything else feels uncertain. And for caregivers, it can just be a simple act of support, finding other caregivers that are going through similar situations, connecting them all. We're building a resource library on our website. It's fairly new, but our goal is to build it up as much as we can. And then we also provide, we work with camps like aphasia camps. So when a loved one is in camp during a certain time period, sometimes it's like 9 to 3 or 10 to 3. We'll have the caregiver come to us and we'll have a room or a different setting set up to where we allow caregivers to connect, to talk, to befriend themselves if they want to, and then to share stories and eat and drink and, like just get resources on ambiguous grief, on how to manage your emotions, how to set boundaries. And it depends on where we're at and what location we're at as to how these days will look. But typically, we try to include some sort of outdoor activity or yoga or something so they can move, stretch, and we give them tools and resources to better manage their schedules or feel less alone because
Yeah,
caregiving can feel very lonely. And I don't think, and especially when you're caregiving for someone with a cognitive disorder like aphasia or a traumatic brain injury, because that person is themselves in some ways, but in other ways they're not. And that can be extremely isolating and lonely. So our goal is to just give them a sense of community and support to know that they're not alone and that they have resources to better manage their time and just their life, to be less stressed, more enriched, and just okay.
yeah. Without those camps per se, how do caregivers hold on to their identity beyond the caregiver role?
It's hard because you're almost forced into that role. I mean, I know I was. I I mean, to be completely honest with you, I haven't been a wife in a really long time, like strictly a wife in 7, 8 years.
Right.
And because, you're forced into these roles that, were once shared, and it's very difficult. And I don't know that you completely can shift yourself out of it. I think the only thing you can do is be more mindful about how you're feeling in certain situations, and you have to, again, set those boundaries the way that you need to, in those situations. But it's very difficult, because life is just weird that way. It throws all kinds of things at you, and you have to respond with whatever hat you're wearing at that time.
Yeah.
But and when you can be intentional about the roles that you miss, like being a wife, when as that person recovers and you have more time, if you can do a date night, do a date night, and get back into those old practices if you can. It may not look like what it looked like before the stroke, but at least it's a step forward in that direction. And it shows you're both working on it and you're both trying.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah. That's the way warriors achieving victories every day.
Yeah.
I used to do I was a contractor before, and I do physical activity that I wanted to keep doing, but it looked terrible. I mean, getting a hammer nails in or using a screw drill, and it was, but now I can do all of that with not much difficulty at all. So
Yeah.
you got to keep trying.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the most impressive things in seeing everything that you've done, you have relied a lot on faith, reflection, and community, and sustaining a caregiver role and a wife role in the long term. Tell us about that.
Well, I was one of those overachievers. I was just gonna not let my situation beat me.
Yeah,
I'm very stubborn and I'm very bullheaded like that. And that contributed a lot to my burnout. But that's why I say it's just, It's difficult, but like I said, you have to figure out coping mechanisms. And my coping mechanisms early on, like I had said, was alcohol because that was
Yeah.
readily available. But then, I am a woman of faith. I do believe in God. And then I was just like, God, I just can't do this on my own. And sometimes just saying that out loud is just like, I need help. And it's really amazing to see throughout our journey when I look back over the past like almost 8 years, the people that God put in our path to help us during that time or to give us an encouraging word. I remember one time we were out having lunch at a Mexican restaurant right down the street from our house. And someone came up to us and while we were walking to our car, and almost like startled me. But it come to find out, he was a pastor, and he said, "I just want to give you a word from God and say that everything's going to be okay, and God knows you, He sees you, and He hasn't forgotten about you, and He loves you." And oh my God. Like Ralph, I bawled. I started crying. Like, and Ryan started crying. And because we had been having those feelings, like, I just I felt like I knew that Ryan was going to be healed. And, after year after year after year, I was so discouraged. And I was like, God, I don't know. Have you forgotten about us? Like, what's our purpose? All these big life questions you ask yourself, like, why am I here? And Ryan would ask himself that, why am I here? Why did God spare me? I should have died. But, it's just, you find people that give you those encouraging words and just help you have faith again. And we've had that happen to us multiple different times over the past years. And it's been phenomenal. So, like, I know that I know that I know that there's a big guy upstairs looking out for us. And, I just have to have faith that everything's going to be okay. And we'll figure it out as we go. Just hope that we're wise enough to follow his guidance wherever he wants us to go and do.
I had to learn to be able to recognize when those moments came, because
Mm,
I had a couple dark moments with a bottle of Jack Daniels in my pain pills. And if it wasn't for pictures of my grandchildren and children on the wall in front of me, I don't know if I'd be here, you know.
yeah.
So you have to be open to that kind of stuff too. Um,
Yes.
let's caregiving can be really isolating. I know that as as much as survivor does. Why is community so important for caregivers? Um, and how do you, I guess, seek out that community?
Well, there's a lot of resources out there. Depending on, I know there's a lot of stroke related resources. There's a lot of aphasia related resources out there that can help you get into caregiver groups. But, what I found is not all groups are created equal. You kind of have to try different ones to figure out which ones you love, and that you want to participate in. But I have one specifically that I'm a part of. It's part of the University of Michigan aphasia program that I attend when I can because it's just a very good group of people that there's no judgment. It's kind of loose, people just talk about what's going on in their life and you can help if you can. Or it's just a really easy conversation and it always is very uplifting and you feel good coming out of it. And that's what you want a group where you feel good. You don't feel like beat down when you're coming out of it. So but you just try those things. And then there's also what we're trying to do with Rooted Caregiver, establish our sense of community for caregivers of cognitive disorders because it's a little bit more intense on the loneliness factor when you're have that communication barrier there. But it depends on kind of you have to try different things and see which ones you like and then go from there. But we're happy to put people in touch with any of our resources that I know of. Like I've been in the scene for, like I said, 8 years now. So I know a lot of resources that are available, and I, often will place people with things I'm like, okay, try this if you like it. There's another one, but it's kind of trial and error that way. But That's one of the biggest parts of Rooted Caregiver is one of our missions is just to establish those connections in that community so they just don't feel alone, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think the key to what you said is reach out. People have to reach out, and I
Yeah.
had to reach out and find support groups. I had to do some research and find out. I was captain of my own team. I could fire a physical therapist and go to a new one. That kind of stuff. You got to be able
Yes.
to do that. It's
Yeah.
a fight or flight thing, I guess they say, and I
Yeah.
chose to fight. What would you say to someone who's hesitant to reach out for support?
Ooh, I would say reconsider that. I know sometimes it's easy to stay in your world, and sometimes getting outside of that can feel really hard and overwhelming, and you're not sure how people are going to view you or see you. But I would encourage you to reach out and to have the courage to join a community, make some new friends in that space because those are the people who truly know what you're going through and they can relate to you and help you. Because, it's like everybody, whether you're a caregiver, stroke survivor, someone with aphasia, like you just want to be seen and understood. And you can be seen and understood in the places where there are people like you who've experienced things like you. And so that's why I encourage them to reach out and to get involved if they can. Like I say, everybody's different, but
Yeah,
um, you know, it's just invaluable. And some of the friends that I've made in some of these communities, these women that are caregivers are amazing women and men that are just doing amazing things and they're just so kind and thoughtful and supportive. It's I would encourage them to have the courage to do that.
yeah. One thing that's made me, since I've been involved with other groups and all, is how open the stroke and PBI community is to sharing whatever. We can talk about anything. One of our shows on Stroke Warrior Radio is about intimacy and sex. There's a lot. Those are things that they didn't tell us about.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing community. How can people find out more about Rooted Caregiver?
They can go on our website, rootedcaregiver.com. And then we have social media channels too, if that's preferred. We're on Facebook and Instagram right now. But yeah, we help with certain camps. We're just trying to figure out where we fit in this space and gathering resources and tools for helping caregivers protect them from burnout and help support, give them some support.
Wonderful. How's,
Yeah.
how's Ryan's recovery today?
He's doing well. Like he is able to speak, some
Good.
and, certain sentences and words, but it's of course not what he had hoped to be at this point. But he did have a major stroke and it affected a large part of his brain.
Yeah.
So he is doing well and he's a great uncle and he spends time with, like his sister's kids and he's able to walk and he loves to walk. So he's doing well physically, I think. But for him, it's if he could just speak better
Yeah.
like that, that's his main thing. But
And recovery is certainly trying on patients, isn't it?
yes, it's a long recovery. They don't tell you that either.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Exactly.
like, yeah.
How's your recovery today?
It's good. It's very good. Thank you for asking. I am in a much better place. Like around year 5, I think it was after Ryan's stroke, I hit a rock bottom as a caregiver. I had just it, I felt like I was just in a really bad place, but I'm proud to report since then I am much better off. But like I said, it's that burnout, it sneaks up
Yeah.
on you and then before you know it, your body is giving out and there's it forces you to act whether you want to or not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, but
Anything
yeah.
else you want to add to today's conversation?
No, I just want to thank you so much for having me. I am just super passionate about caregivers and providing support. I don't want to cry, but like it's just like it's so needed. It's so needed.
It really is. It really is. And I really hope that we can do some more shows together. We
Yeah.
do have a caregiver hour every week. So, I mean, this is an important topic, something that, again, I didn't realize how important because I was single during my recovery. So, I'm learning much more about it. So, and what I've learned from, I want to thank you for today. Um, and I appreciate you coming on. But what I've kind of learned from your website, the socials, and all my other conversations is if a caregiver is feeling exhausted, I'm going to talk to caregivers now from what I've learned. If you're exhausted, you feel invisible, if you're wondering how much longer you can keep going, please hear this clearly. You do matter.
Yes.
You matter in your partner's life, you matter in your life. Caring yourself for yourself is not, how shall I say it, abandoning your loved one. It's part of loving them well. I
Yes.
encourage you to visit rootedcaregiver.com to explore resources and community created specifically for caregivers. And from all of us here at Stroke Warrior Radio, keep catching the wave. Warriors achieving victories every day. Thank you.
Love that. Thank you.